This is the Cameron Journal Podcast. It's a place where we talk about important things. It's a place where we bring a little slice of the news to you. It's a place where we do important things, have important conversations. It's also things that I like to talk about. My name is Cameron Cowan, and this is the Cameron Journal Podcast. Today on the Cameron Journal Podcast, I am so happy to welcome Ron Upshaw to the show today. He is one half of a very popular radio team here in Seattle, and they also do a lot of great work in real estate, and I used to work in real estate in this market, so in our ongoing I talk to interesting business people doing interesting business things, this is the next iteration of that. So welcome, Ron, to the Cameron Journal Podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing pretty good. Thanks for having me on.
Good. So I want to dive right into the weirdness and the strangeness of everything. Real estate in Seattle has been weird for many years. I've lived here since 2014. It's been weird for a while. The pandemic seems to have thrown a spanner in the whole works. What the hell is going on? Like, what has happened? I don't understand.
I think it's the way I like to think about it is like choose your poison in a way. Because we live in an area that has multiple top 5 companies in the world. You know, so you've got Amazon, you have Starbucks, you have Microsoft, you have Boeing, et cetera, you know, even something like Costco. And so what does that mean? It means that a lot of professional type of people move here because these businesses are headquartered here. So for instance, if we lived in, Poughkeepsie, New York, that city would bend over backwards to have one of those companies move to Poughkeepsie, right? If it's like, oh my God, Costco's going to move here, are you crazy? Like they would freak out to have that because they're high-paying jobs and they bring a lot of money to the area. Right. And so when you think about it just as a supply and demand issue, we have a lot of people that want to live here. The people that are moving here are typically high earners, and all those people need a place to live. And so when you had the pandemic happen, what we saw in our business is you had a lot of folks that were attached somehow to tech. They were like, oh, I guess I'm going to be working from home now. That means I don't have to live where I currently am. I want a bigger house with an office and a yard or whatever. You fill in the blanks, whatever they wanted. And so it just created this slingshot effect, coupled with the fact that interest rates were at almost all-time lows. So you could borrow money very cheaply. You could stay home more than you had ever in your career. And it was a perfect storm in this particular market to make real estate prices rise. That's sort of the way I look at it.
Yes, and I always forget to put my phone away and it flashes. Yes, I mean that I definitely see the whole tech work from home angle thing happening. Now, here's one thing that you mentioned that I thought was a bit odd. That should make prices go, in my mind, it should make prices go down, not up. Like if everyone's kind of like, oh, Seattle, too many problems, to Bellevue we go, let's get to the other side of Lake Washington. That should make things around here in Seattle much, much cheaper and nicer. It seems to have not done that. And I don't understand why that is.
Well, I can see your logic in that. But the other thing that I didn't talk about, which also contributed to this, is a metric that economists call you've probably heard the term balanced market, buyer's market, seller's market.
Right.
So that concept with economists is a thing called months of inventory. And so I'll do a real quick wind up and then get to the punchline. An average market, a balanced market, is 4 months of inventory. What does that mean? That means that if we got no new listings on right now, that they would take 4 months for everything to sell. That would be a balanced market. During the pandemic, in most neighborhoods here, that was under 1 month of inventory. There were
Mm.
some markets where I would have buyers to say, I want to live on Capitol Hill. Well, it's at 0.4%, 0.4 months of inventory. And so you just had very low supply. If we were in a
I had that when I came back here. I moved back here in September 2020 after being on the East Coast, and I couldn't find an apartment.
right,
Like, I was kind of like, I used to literally work in rental housing property management. I'm like, how is there like there's literally like 10 units that are $6,000 a month that I cannot begin to afford, and there's like rooms in people's houses. I need like one bedroom. Like, I'm just me. I just broke up with my
right.
girlfriend, all this type of thing. Like, what the hell? And so I ended up in this building downtown. That's a whole other story. But so like, yeah, it was the weirdest thing. Just like there was nothing to be found. It was so weird.
Yeah, it is. It's weird, but not weird. And at the same time, meaning that there's a narrative that makes sense. Like you're saying, I live very close to the one of the Facebook buildings here in Seattle. And during the summertime, when, May, June, July, every morning there are three bus loads for the past couple of years. I don't know if it'll happen this year, but every morning there are three buses that pull up, and a gaggle of fresh college graduates step off those buses and they march into the Facebook building. And most of them are going to get job offers for mid six figures a year right out of college because they were the brightest and best programmers in their program. So you see like
Yeah.
Boston College and MIT sweatshirts and Ohio State sweatshirts and Michigan sweatshirts. All these kids, all these 20 somethings are going to move here and start their first job out of college is going to be making 195, 200 grand a year. So where are they going to live? Well, they want to live close to work. So like all of these apartment inventories and all that stuff, the rental market gets gobbled up, and then the housing prices get gobbled up as well. So once they're at Amazon for a couple of years or Facebook for a couple of years, they're like, okay, I like Seattle. This is a pretty cool town. Maybe I'm going to buy something here. And so, I just sold a house to that person. He's just turned 30, works at Amazon, is doing pretty well. He wanted a townhouse with a rooftop deck so he can have a party with his friends that come over and have a view. And so he bought his first place would have been something that probably you and I and our parents would never have dreamed of getting into. Our very first house at that level, brand new townhouse in Seattle, Washington for, I don't want to give out the price because it's
As someone who graduated during the great financial crisis in the humanities, cannot relate.
right. I mean,
Like,
that's the
it is
world we live in.
like it has taken me to now to where I'm finally being like, okay, I'm seriously considering about buying a house in the next 3 or 4 years. Like, I'm the millennial story because I'm 35 in 2 months. So it's like I'm finally being like, oh, like maybe I can finally like do the house thing, all this sort of thing. So yeah, I mean it is, yeah, like my parents didn't buy a house till they got married in 1993. They paid $100,000 for the largest house on their block, which back then was a lot of money. That was like, woohoo.
Right.
Like people, like
And
my dad literally thought he overpaid at $114,000.
so the flip side of this, to you go back to my
My,
Poughkeepsie,
how
New
times
York.
have changed.
Yeah, to go back to my Poughkeepsie, New York, and nothing against Poughkeepsie if you're from there, example is in those smaller markets that don't have these behemoth companies, prices are a lot lower. At the same time, there's less stability or there's less momentum in that market. So, there's a lot of sentiment around Seattle of like, oh my God, they're shutting down Best Cafe, or like tech bros go home. Like there's a lot of that sentiment, which I get because there is a nostalgia for like when I lived here in '98, you could live downtown for $600 a month, and Pearl Jam was right around the corner. Like, I was here. I get it. That was an interesting time, but also a lot of the infrastructure wasn't here, and you didn't. I don't know. I never bemoan progress in a way, um, unless something's like an historic. If someone wants to tear down the Space Needle, like, I'll protest that. But if you're
Yeah.
tearing down a nondescript, crappy warehouse and you're going to put in mixed use, retail below, condos above, like, okay,
No,
like,
I was sad to see Beth's Cafe close down too, but I drive that block quite right. My corporate mailbox is in Northgate, so I drive on that part of Aurora a few times a week.
and I
That
think,
block
by the
needs
way, Best is back, but
redevelopment.
just not 24 hours.
Yes, and I mean, and that's great for them and all that. But honestly, that block could do with some redevelopment. Those buildings have all seen better days. It's right across from Green Lake. Like, that needs to be a 5/1.
And
Like,
then people
just
say, "Oh,
give Beth an attractive option to come back to the new 5/1 development. That's
people will go, oh, well, how is that affordable?" It's like, it's not affordable by 20 years ago standards. That is true. I feel for people that work a 40-hour job. Like, for instance, my mailman here,
Yeah.
he can't live in Seattle. And I think I wish it wasn't that way. Like, the dude that owns the bodega up the street probably can't afford to live in Seattle. Your barista, your server at a restaurant, the bartender, probably would really struggle to live in the city where they work. And, that's a bigger, above my pay grade on how to solve that. But the market demands, as they currently exist, have priced people out like that. And I lived in the Bay Area back in the day, and that's very similar to what you saw in San Francisco and Oakland. Is it's just like, dude, if you want to, unless you're making bank, you're not living in the city. It's just, that was a foregone conclusion.
Yeah, I think, yes. I think at the same time, though, I think there's kind of two factors here at play. One is the fact that, much like how Denver used to be, which is where I grew up, um, and how Seattle used to be, is it was the type of city where you could own a single family house fairly near to work, but still have all the city amenities, which isn't possible in New York or Chicago, all this type of thing. And so Seattle kind of was in this cool place where it's like, yeah, you could own a cool single family house, but still be in the city and all this type of thing. And that has led to the city not being as dense as it probably should be, given the fact that we don't have
So,
land.
so I'll ask you about Denver, because I lived in Littleton back in the day.
Yeah.
Why do you think the city of Denver went so hard after tech? What's in it for the city?
I think it was to get off the boom and bust cycle. So Colorado has always been about mining, oil, gas, extractive industries. The problem is commodities boom and bust. So Denver, regardless of what else was happening nationally, economically, would go through these boom and bust cycles. Three
You think
happened before, like two happened when I was in high school, and that was only 2002 to 2006. And the national economy was great, but if commodity prices
right?
collapse, down it goes. So I think for Denver, it was a way to say, hey, we have Boulder, we have University of Colorado. Let's get these companies here and let's get off this crappy boom and bust commodities cycle that we've
But
been on literally since statehood in 1876.
do you think it's a net positive for Denver, even though a lot of old timers there will feel pressed out and feel their neighborhoods are gentrified now?
Well, yeah, and Denver is not protecting houses the way Seattle has. In Denver, you can buy up six crappy post-war prefabs, tear them down, and put up 60 townhomes. And I can take you to 5 streets in Denver where that's true. Um, yeah, I think I think Denver has changed a lot. I was there this summer and I was driving around, and there's a lot of streets that don't go through anymore, which sucks in a city with a perfect grid. There's there's a lot of stuff that has changed, there's a lot of stuff that has moved out, and there's a lot of people that have fled to the suburbs. And Denver has the advantage of Denver has lots of land. So the city
Yeah,
can expand out east, well, not so much to the west because the mountains, but can go east. We don't have that here. We don't have the
right.
Great Plains to build onto
Well,
like Denver does.
I really feel for, especially marginalized communities that have been entrenched in a neighborhood that gets ran over. Like that is a thing that I don't
Oh
know the
yeah.
solution to. So like if you're in
No,
Capitol
I mean,
Hill,
Denver, this is true in Park Hill, which was a historically Black community, very wealthy Black community. 5 Points, which was literally Jack Kerouac wrote about 5 Points and On the Road. That's how famous it is. There's a plaque. I used to own a shop in that neighborhood, actually, in the middle of its gentrification. There's, yeah, Capitol Hill, where my seamstress friend lives, all this type of thing. Those neighborhoods are changing so much and things are so expensive. My seamstress friend clears 6 figures a year doing bridal dresses and she can't buy the house that she rents. And she's paying 2,200 and is like, "Oh my god, I got such a huge deal. This is so spectacular. I hope they never raise my rent." Like, sort of thing. I mean, like, that's how bad it is now in Denver because
yeah,
the same demand situation that we have here, all these tech companies and things have moved in, education has come in, all this type of thing, and so the price of everything has just exploded.
yeah, and I mean, I have fond memories of being a wide-eyed 20-something going to Capitol Hill in Seattle and being like, okay, I'm going to experience some things outside my comfort zone. I'm going to
Yeah.
meet communities and see outfits and just experience life in a bigger city that is really diminished now. And like you don't have that. So I think as much, and I understand why people would feel resentful of that because it changed the tone and tenor of that neighborhood definitely. When you have Starbucks come in and make a roastery that costs $4 million or whatever, it's not the neighborhood coffee shop anymore. And
Yeah.
so trying to hang on to the identity of what made it a great neighborhood uh, when property owners are like, wow, I could either have this or sell the whole building and just let them bulldoze it. Maybe I cash out right now. Maybe I take those, 7-figure deal and move to Tahiti or whatever it is they want to do.
No, I mean, I think that is kind of the uncomfortable truth of a lot of these situations, especially like in Denver, you had lots of older people, old Denver, who they were ready to cash out and move to the old folks' home. And bless them, they've been sitting on a house for 40 years. They deserve to get paid. Absolutely no
Sure.
hate. And I think here you have the same situation. You have, sort of legacy Seattle property owners who are ready to, and they're happy, hey, house prices have gone up, great, all this type of thing. That's lovely. But I do think it has robbed here's what I think is kind of common between the two, and I think it's especially true here in Seattle, is the things you lose in that whole process are stuff that you don't appreciate it until it's gone. And so my
Okay.
my issue is like we're in a situation where, you know, artists, creatives, people who make cities interesting and juicy can't afford to live here.
Yeah, I agree with you 100,000%. Like that was the thing of like getting the thing that changes people's minds about culture is proximity and exposure. So the more that I can be around people not like me and learn to appreciate how similar we are instead of how different we are, the better a culture is, in my opinion. And so when you homogenize it and gentrify it, you lose that texture like 100%. And so, like, how do we solve that? Um, it's complicated.
Well, that I mean, that does kind of transition us into I have my ballot here. I need to put it in the mail today. I-135. We're voting on in next week. My ballot is do I have to put it in the mail today? Um, and all this sort of thing. And this whole idea of social housing projects to pull a page from the 20th century book. And I'll open up and say I'm not voting for it because, to be honest, as someone who's lived in Seattle for a great many years now, I don't really want to pay for it. We pay a lot in taxes for the privilege of living here. Who knows how much longer we're going to be able to not have a state income tax the way Olympia is going. I don't want to pay for it. I don't necessarily think it's the greatest best idea. I feel like it's giving the city a blank check and LA spent $1 billion for 6 units. And I know that Washington will say, hold my beer. Like, we'll spend $1 billion and get nothing, sort of thing. Um, I think it's a nice idea. I don't think it's necessarily the solution as such, for the city to kind of take over and get involved in all of that. I don't, especially when there's not solid plans. There's not, here's where we're going to build it, here's how much it's going to cost. I mean, the details are lacking, and I think that's concerning.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read the fine print on that particular voting issue, but to me, it goes back to what kind of city do we want Seattle, Bellevue, Kent, Everett? Like, what do we want it to look like and function like? Do we want there to be different strata? Um, I do. I try to, do projects every year in our real estate business that are affordable housing and do focus on, underrepresented communities. Like we work on that really, that's part of our business model to be available and trusted in those communities. And so it's hard to crack that code. But you're right, having a good intention is not a plan.
And
And
our
largely
Seattle's guilty of doing that to people.
a
We
lot.
start out with really great ideas and intentions. We waste a ton of cash that we don't have on stuff that doesn't work. And
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
and with something as important as housing, I don't want to waste $1 billion to get a whole lot of nothing, because it's going to be blocked by whatever, or something's going to happen and we'll have allocated all this money for
My,
what?
my biggest issue for years and years and years with the city of Seattle has been the largest landholder in Western Washington is the city of Seattle. So instead of creating this Rube Goldberg Byzantine process, just go build it. Like you have land. You are able to, if you wanted to make homeless housing, affordable housing, any kind of housing, just do it. Like nobody is stop you. You have the permit department, you have the tax department. Like you are literally in the catbird seat. But what Seattle likes to do is to create systems that where they don't actually have to develop anything. They want to add fees to everybody else that wants to develop things. And so it's a frustrating situation. It's a frustrating situation because it's like if City of Seattle truly wanted to build homeless housing, for instance, build it. You have vacant lots, you have assets in your portfolio. Take it and build on it. Like, don't make a developer set aside 10% of their stock or pay a penalty fee because we all know that that doesn't work.
I think this I-135, the goal is to allocate the money to make that possible, which is, one good aspect of it. However, you can get neighborhood issues. The city owns the old Naval Air Station that has not been used since World War II, and they wanted to put affordable housing out there. There's only one problem. It's located next to Magnolia, and you can imagine how the neighbors felt about that when the city
Sure.
threatened to move in the poors. And considering they make all the political donations, that project got shut down real fast. That went
Yeah,
nowhere. Um, so yeah, I think that is, I agree. I think the city could do more of its own and cut its own path, but you also get NIMBYism that
of
makes
course.
that difficult
And
depending
I
on
and
where it
I don't
is.
personally I don't want to crucify someone that feels that way with the what we already talked about with the prices of housing in here. There's a homeless tiny house village at the bottom of my street. And I wish I could say we didn't see a rise in petty crime when that was installed, but that's not true. Package theft went up, car break-ins went up, um, prowling went up, broken windows went up, seeing hypodermic needles on the sidewalks went up. So, seeing human feces and trash and people rummaging through stuff, all of that went up. Can I definitively tell you that it's 100% because that homeless village went into my neighborhood? No, I can't tell you that 100%. Does it seem to coincide? Yes. So, I'd be lying to you if I didn't tell you, wow, when that leaves our neighborhood, I'm going to feel a little bit better because having your car broken into or having your package stolen is a drag because you can't even call the cops. They're not going to come
No,
out because your Amazon package got stolen.
no.
Like, they're not going to come out because someone, cracked your window on your car and stole an iPhone cable or whatever it
My
is.
my car got broken into last year. I waited 2.5 hours for the cops in the middle of the night before someone finally showed up to give me a police report for the insurance company. Total cost to replace the window and get all the glass out of my car, $1,200.
Yeah, so
So
I don't.
it was a great day
If
for Carter
someone is saying
Subaru.
not, if someone
Like,
is saying not in my backyard based on race or sexual orientation or something like that, I'm a hard no, immediate no. But if it's like not in my backyard because I don't want human waste on the sidewalk, I'm like, it's a
it's
good point.
hard. I mean, no,
It's a good
it is
point.
hard to tell people, yeah, you need to go along with this, even though it's going to have all these knock-on effects that are going to end up costing you money and quality of life and all this type of thing. And I mean, yes, that is one of the difficulties, I think, with what we're with this whole dynamic, which ironically gets into the other thing I wanted to ask you about. Um, we're one of the few cities in the country that actually did the thing that most of the cities won't do, which is upzone. We actually did it. And we used to have the most cranes in the nation building, building, building. Um, what have been the knock-on effects of upzoning in Seattle? Unpopular as it was.
Um, I mean, I don't know if I'm smart enough to answer that question truly, but I do think,
Well, just your observations.
well, if you're a person that had a property that then was inside the upzone area, like we
Mm.
had a client, we met with a client the other day, regular guy, I think he's an electrician, bought a 900 square foot house back in the day, and it happened. He had no idea this was coming, but they built the new light rail right by his place. Developer came in, assembled that neighborhood. He made, he's a young guy. He's in his mid 30s, like your age. He cleared $1 million on that house. He's thrilled with that. It's like, yeah, I'll pay me $1 million. Of course I'll move. Like, I'm in
Right.
my 30s. Like, where do
Right.
I sign up for that?
Yeah.
So
I
if
mean,
you're
I would be in the same position. I'd be kind of like, I'll call Hanson Brothers today. Like, you'll be
right,
surprised how fast I can be out of here.
and so for him, that would upzoning would be a very positive thing.
Right.
And so for somebody else, they might see that as a negative thing. So I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier. It's like, what is your vision of? It's ironic to me that some of the same people that call for affordable housing and stomp their feet around that issue also are anti upzoning and anti-development and want to spray paint the crane when it shows up in their neighborhood. It's like, you can't have it both ways. This is what higher density looks like. Higher density means that we tear down these 900 square foot houses that were built in 1945 and we put in 60 apartments. That's what it means.
Yeah.
And so I don't,
Well, that gets back
your
into that
anger is
tension of we
misled.
used to be a city where you could own a single family house and still be in the city and all this type of thing. And that's just not true anymore.
Right. What's the philosopher of like, live, see the world as it truly is and not how you want it to be.
Yeah.
Um, and again, there are places in America, like I follow a guy on YouTube that bought a building, I think it's in Columbus, Ohio. for $13,000, and he's renovating it, and it's fun to watch the renovation journey on his YouTube channel. And it's like, okay, I could go live in Columbus, Ohio, and buy my own building, but it's like, do I want to live in Columbus, Ohio? I'd rather
Yeah, I mean
live.
that's my problem is like I'm a working full-time artist, I'm a writer, I have 3 books out. I do this, the Cameron Journal. This is what I do. It's not impossible for me to live in kind of anywhere USA, but when you're a serious news politics communicator who's interviewing people from all over the world, all this type of thing, being in a bigger city helps. I also do public speaking, so I travel a lot, so I need to have an airport that has connections that go places, all this type of thing. And so everyone's just kind of like, "Oh, like move somewhere cheaper." And I'm kind of like, there's a lot of other stuff I lose that affects my business when I go to some of these other places. And I feel like there's a lot of people that are kind of in that in that trouble. Even if you're on the W-2 job lifestyle, it's like, okay, you're gonna move to Columbus. How many major employers are there in Columbus? Not
Exactly.
I mean, not many because the state government's the biggest employer in Columbus. I mean, like, the opportunities just are not the same. So it's like, what are you gonna do? You know?
Well, and like, so I don't mind paying a premium, and I realize this comes across as incredibly privileged, which is true. Like, I like having nice restaurants, and I like going to a professional hockey game. And I like that when Lizzo does a tour, she comes to Seattle and I can go to the Lizzo show. Like,
Yeah.
I like those things. I've lived in parts of America where it's like, oh, Lizzo's 4 hours away, so I guess we're gonna drive, and or I guess I won't see that show.
Yeah.
Or there is no professional sports here, or there is no fancy restaurant. And not that you eat there every day, but knowing that it's available is kind of nice. Like knowing that, like, if I feel like vegan ice cream today, I can go get that. You don't get that everywhere.
No.
And so the flip side of that is that bigger, more affluent markets support those type of things. And when it trickles down to individual housing, um, that's a really hard equation to crack.
It
Like, do we
is.
want the government to subsidize people's housing? Do we want our tax dollars to provide grants? Let's say for your argument earlier, for every neighborhood, we want 3% of the population to be artists, musicians, fill in the blanks. So, in order to make that goal, we will have to subsidize their rent. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
So, if we said Capitol Hill, we want, and I don't think 3% is even enough, but let's just say that that's the number. We want 3% of the people to be artists, poets, musicians, singers, whatever, painters, you fill in the whatever you want that to be, dancers. I would love that because I think it adds texture to the neighborhood. Do I want to say, okay, that's going to cost, I'm pulling numbers out of thin air, that'll cost $100 million a year in rent subsidies. Are we okay with that? I don't know. I don't get to answer that question. But like, would the
I
neighborhood be
think
better?
that would be a hard sell for most people.
But would
Just,
the quality
you know,
and the actual life fulfillment of that neighborhood be better? I think it would.
mm,
Is there a way to pay for that in a viable way that's not a political nuclear bomb? Probably not. And let's go even further than that. How many firefighters and mailmen and service industry workers do we want,
teachers.
teachers do we want in the neighborhood? Like, I have a little mailbox because we talked about my packages getting stolen, and a couple of the people that work there love them. Go in, we talk about music. You're hanging out, picking up your mail. I don't know what you make working at a mail service. Probably not a lot. Like, I hope they live in the neighborhood. I've never asked them, but like, what percentage of the population do we want by category in our neighborhoods, and who pays for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that a lot of I think Seattle is lacking and would be nice to see, and you see it a little bit in older buildings, is when you have, like a building that's maybe 3 floors and has 3 units of floors. You end up with a 9, 10 unit building, or you end up with a duplex or a triplex or all that type of thing. Those things are incredibly difficult to build now, nigh illegal, and and in many cases, because the cost of material is not cost effective, doesn't no money to be made, no one's going to do it. Um, I feel like that's the type of thing that could help fill in some of the missing housing that we're seeing, because we're very good at building tall, glittery glass and steel buildings. Drive by UW, they got 50 of them going. I got one going up down my street because I live at 6th and Yesler. So we got two. We got the hospital remodeling on one side of the street and a new apartment building on the other. And like we've got that done very well, but we're not building, that the kind of less luxury, maybe smaller but still really cool stuff that your ordinary firefighters, teachers, policemen, all this type of thing would
Because
want
those
to
things
live, or
don't
all this
pencil.
type of thing. Well,
Those
but that's
buildings don't pencil.
they don't pencil, but that's what I'm saying. If we were going to subsidize anything, that would be where I would say the city could probably spend some money and get something good, is providing some type of subsidy to make those buildings pencil, or at least do something with all the crazy permitting requirements. Like, I feel like there's things that the city hasn't done that it could do that would make those type of buildings pencil out.
It's possible, but with how difficult it is to build something in the Puget Sound area, I don't bemoan a developer that's like, I want max profit because this is such a slog to make it through permitting and inspections and find tradespeople that will show up on time and actually work. Um, Getting that building built, I don't bemoan them for saying, dude, go for it, go for the home run. Because if you've ever tried to, I did a remodel in my kitchen several years ago, and the inspector came in, and the outlet was 6 inches in his mind too far to the right. It's not that I didn't have enough outlets, and it's not, and the outlet was under an island. So the outlet, I don't even know if I've ever used it. He made me call the electrician back and add another outlet 6 inches away. So I have two outlets right next to each other. That's just one guy, and maybe he was having a bad day or whatever, but it cost me $1,200, $1,500 to get the electrician back out, install the new outlet, have him come back and re-inspect. It's, you get where I'm going with this, but
Right.
it's like, multiply that times building a building.
And
Like,
this is where I think the city could do the most good. Let's get rid of some of this silly stuff,
right. And they're going to
electrical
say
outlet
it's not silly because
foolishness.
it's a fire hazard or whatever it was. But yeah, I mean, you raised some good points. And I think this is a crazy market in a sense because it's a market that has a lot of money flowing through it.
Yeah.
I will choose that suite of problems before I choose the suite of problems where you're Detroit and now you're tearing down entire neighborhoods because they're vacant and abandoned, and you can't sell the, what's their dome there, the Pontiac Dome or whatever it was called.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
they couldn't give it away. Um,
Hey, you don't need to go that far. Look at what Tacoma has. They don't have a major employer. State Farm came and left, and
Weyerhaeuser
Tacoma,
left.
yeah, so I mean, so Tacoma is on the struggle, and the only thing that's really gotten it exciting down there is people who can work from home that don't have to do that terrible commute. I did that commute for 3 months. It's awful.
Right. So I mean, you're going to have problems. There's no scenario where we live with millions of people where we don't have a suite of problems. So
Right.
which suite of problems do we want? fortunately or unfortunately, we have the too much money pressure problems versus the too few amount of money pressure problems. And so I've lived in Mississippi. I've lived in New Orleans. Like I know what that feels like versus living in Seattle or San Francisco or Dallas. Um, I prefer this set of problems. And
No, I
it's
mean, I spent before I went to high school in Colorado, but before that I was living in Northwest Arkansas. And at that time, there was basically two things in Northwest Arkansas: Walmart in Bentonville and the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville. That was it. Well, Tyson Chicken kind of, but they didn't have a lot down there at that time. They do now. And that was kind of it. And if you didn't work for one of those three things, you were working for, this small construction company or the government or whatever have you. And like things were cheap, but there also wasn't anything moving. And that does have its own set of problems and difficulties. And a lot of young people end up leaving for opportunities elsewhere, because what are you gonna do down there unless your family owns land and you can do agriculture or whatever have you. So I mean, I agree with you. If I'm gonna pick my set of problems, I would rather have these problems because at least we have the resources to do something about them, as opposed
But
to places where we don't have the resources and can't, and therefore can't really do anything. So that's quite fair. Well, this has been such a great conversation. We've come full circle. Why don't you tell everybody where we can find you, where we can keep in touch, and if they need to buy a house in Seattle?
sure, just go to our website. It's me and my business partner and radio partner, Don. Our website is ronanddon.com.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on the Cameron Journal
Sure.
podcast.
I enjoyed it. Thanks.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter. And we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast.